There is a 42nd floor penthouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan with a view of the entire city and a kitchen that was designed by an architect who once cooked for 2 presidents. The kitchen has a 12-foot marble island in the middle of it, polished to a finish so perfect it reflects the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a dark lake at night. The marble was quarried in northern Italy. The faucets were shipped from Paris. The stove alone cost more than most people's cars. The kitchen belongs technically to one of the wealthiest men in the United States, a tech billionaire named Cyrus Harrington. Cyrus does not cook. Cyrus has never cooked. Cyrus hired the architect to build the kitchen because his third wife told him that a penthouse at this altitude needed a kitchen to match. His third wife is a 32-year-old woman named Naomi Carter Harrington. She is the kind of woman who appears on the society pages in dresses designed for her personally. She is black. She is beautiful. She has 2 master's degrees in art history, and she has not been touched by her husband in 11 months. Not in anger, not in passion, not even in passing. She lives in a $42 million penthouse with a man who has forgotten she exists. She sleeps in a bedroom the size of most apartments. She eats most of her meals alone at a dining table that seats 16. And at 1:47 in the morning on a cold Wednesday night in October in that 12-foot marble kitchen, she walked up behind a 29-year-old blonde private chef named Lucas Vogel, who had been hired 3 weeks earlier to cook for her husband's business dinners, and she said 7 words into his ear that she had been holding inside her chest for 21 days. The 7 words made him drop the paring knife he had been holding. Those 7 words changed the direction of both of their lives forever. The sentence was, "Put me on this counter and don't stop until I scream." This is the story of how that sentence arrived in that kitchen at that exact hour of that exact night. It is the story of a woman who had stopped being touched and had started to forget what touching even was. It is the story of a man who had spent 10 years in the most demanding kitchens in the world and had perfected every skill a chef could perfect except the one that mattered most, which was how to let someone see him. It is the story of midnight tasting plates and private wine and the slow, inevitable thing that happens when 2 people who are starving for entirely different things discover they can feed each other at the same table. Her name was Naomi. His name was Lucas. And everything about both of them was about to change. Lucas Vogel grew up in a small house in upstate New York, the only son of an Austrian immigrant carpenter and a pastry chef from a small town in Pennsylvania. His mother had taught him how to make apple strudel when he was 6 years old. His father had taught him that a thing worth building should be built with your hands, slowly and without shortcuts. By the time he was 14, he had known that he was going to cook for a living because cooking was the one thing that felt to him like a language he had been born already speaking. He worked his first kitchen job at 15. By 19, he had saved enough to enroll at the Culinary Institute of America. He graduated near the top of his class. He did a 2-year stage at a 3-star restaurant in Lyon that nearly killed him. He came back to New York at 23 and spent 6 years in the hottest Michelin kitchens in the city, working 90-hour weeks, burning himself over and over on the hot pass and learning to love the scars. By the time he turned 29, he had the body of a man who had been standing on his feet 16 hours a day for a decade. 6'1", broad through the shoulders the way men who lift cast iron pots and 50-pound sacks of flour get broad, which is different from the way gym men get broad. Blonde hair he wore slightly too long for his profession because he could not be bothered to cut it more than twice a year. Blue-gray eyes that had learned, in a decade of hard kitchens, how to read a room in 2 seconds. Women noticed him at every event he worked. Lucas had not noticed them back in at least 5 years. Lucas had a code, and the code was simple. The kitchen came first, the food came first, the craft came first. Anything that distracted from the craft was the enemy of the craft. 6 months before he met Naomi, he had left restaurant work and started taking private chef contracts. He was tired of giving the best cooking of his life to strangers who did not understand what they were eating. His third private contract was for a tech billionaire named Cyrus Harrington, who needed a chef for a series of business dinners. Lucas had signed the contract the same morning he had been interviewed because he had walked into the penthouse kitchen and had known immediately that he would sign any contract they put in front of him to work in that room. He had been in that kitchen for 3 weeks by the time Naomi walked up behind him at 1:47 in the morning. In those 3 weeks, he had seen her exactly 6 times, always in passing, always briefly, always in the company of her husband or his staff. He had thought, each of the 6 times, that she was the most elegant woman he had ever seen in his entire life. He had also thought, each of the 6 times, that she looked like a woman who was slowly drowning inside a very beautiful house. He had not said anything about either thought to anyone, including himself, because his code did not permit thoughts like that about a client's wife. Naomi Carter had not always been Naomi Carter Harrington. Before she became the third wife of a tech billionaire, she had been the oldest daughter of a middle-class family in Atlanta. Raised by a mother who taught English at a public high school and a father who worked as an accountant for a mid-size firm downtown. Her parents had put 3 children through college on a combined income that would not have paid for the shoes she now owned. She had gone to Spelman for undergrad and to Columbia for her first master's, and to NYU for her second. By the time she was 27, she was the assistant curator of a small but well-respected contemporary art museum in Chelsea, and she was happier in the small studio apartment she rented on West 23rd Street than she had ever been since. She met Cyrus Harrington at a museum gala. He was 59, twice divorced, worth $11 billion, and looking for a new wife. He pursued her for 8 months. He was charming. He was attentive. He told her, in his quiet, confident billionaire way, that he had been looking for someone like her his entire life. For the first year of their relationship, he was a man she could almost see herself loving. They married when she was 30. She had stopped working at the museum 6 months into the marriage. Cyrus had told her gently at first that the assistant curator salary was embarrassing given his own income. She had resisted for a while, then given in, because she had been tired. By the time she realized that giving up her work had been the beginning of losing herself, it had been too late to go back without humiliating herself in front of the entire New York art world. For the next 3 years, she had been the perfect billionaire's wife. She had hosted the dinner parties. She had smiled at the business partners. She had worn the dresses and sat through the operas and the charity auctions. And she had felt herself getting smaller and smaller and smaller until the woman who had once published academic papers on post-war African-American painters had become a woman whose main purpose in any given week was to look good on her husband's arm. By the fall she turned 32, Cyrus had stopped reaching for her entirely. She had lain in the big empty bed by herself for 11 months and stared at the ceiling and felt a particular kind of empty that she had never felt before in her entire life. 11 months of that particular empty, and then a blonde chef named Lucas Vogel walked into her kitchen for the first time to prepare dinner for a group of her husband's venture capital partners, and everything about the rest of her life started to rearrange itself without her knowing it yet. The first time she saw him, he was standing at the Marble Island slicing shallots with a knife she could tell was expensive from across the room. The shallots were falling away from the blade in translucent slivers so thin she could see the light from the overhead pendants through them. He was working with a quiet, focused precision that reminded her of the way a surgeon works. His white chef coat was pressed. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with the lean, functional muscle of a man who used his hands for a living. He did not look up when she walked into the kitchen. She stood at the edge of the kitchen for a long moment without saying anything, just watching him work. Then, because she did not want to startle him, she said, "Good evening." He looked up. His blue-gray eyes met hers across the 12 feet of polished marble, and the overhead pendants caught the light in his hair and turned it the color of old gold. And Naomi Carter Harrington, who had spent 3 years being invisible in her own home, felt herself become briefly, unmistakably visible to another human being for the first time in longer than she could remember. He said, "Good evening, Mrs. Harrington. I am Lucas, the chef. I hope I am not in your way." She said, "Not at all. I was just coming in for a glass of water." He said, "Please. The kitchen is yours." She walked to the refrigerator. She poured herself a glass of water. She stood there for a moment with her back to him, drinking slowly, her heart doing a small unfamiliar thing in her chest that she did not immediately recognize because it had been so long since she had felt it. Then she turned around and asked him what he was making. He told her. Chilled corn bisque, roasted Muscovy duck with cherry gastrique, a dark chocolate tart with olive oil and sea salt. She said, "That sounds wonderful." He said, "The gastrique has been fighting me for an hour, but it will come together." She smiled. It was the first real smile her face had made in weeks. She walked out of the kitchen with her glass of water. She walked down the long hallway to her bedroom. She closed the door. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She thought, what on earth was that? She did not know. She did not want to name it. Naming it would have made it real, and she was not ready for anything to be real yet. The second time she saw him was the following Wednesday. Another dinner party. Halfway through the second course, she excused herself from the dining room and took a small detour through the kitchen. Lucas was plating the next course. He looked up when she came in. He just looked at her in her dark green evening dress with her hair pinned up and her mother's small pearl earrings on, and his face did something very small and very controlled that she only noticed because she had been looking for it. She said, "The duck is wonderful. The cherry is perfectly balanced. It is not too sweet. It is not too sour. It is exactly where it should be." He stopped plating. He looked at her across the kitchen, really looked at her, the way a man looks at a woman who has just said something about his work that he had not expected a client's wife to say. He said, "Mrs. Harrington, do you cook?" She said, "No. But I taste very carefully." He said, "I can tell." They looked at each other across the island for one long moment. Then she said, "I should get back to the table." He said, "Of course." She walked out of the kitchen and sat back down at the dining table while her husband talked about a new investment in something she did not understand. And somewhere inside her chest, a tiny new room that had not existed an hour earlier had just finished building itself. And the door to that room was standing open, and she did not yet know what was going to walk into it. After that dinner, she started coming to the kitchen. She came for small reasons at first. A glass of water, a second glass of water, a snack she did not really want. Each time, Lucas was there cleaning or prepping or experimenting with something for the next service. Each time, they exchanged a few quiet sentences about the food. Each time, Naomi went back to her bedroom feeling for a few minutes like a person who had briefly stepped out of her own life and into someone else's. By the end of the second week, the visits had a pattern. She came down after her husband had retired to his study at 10 or 11. She stood across the marble island from Lucas and asked him about whatever he was working on. He explained with the quiet patience of a man who had been asked the same questions by much less interesting people. She had good questions. Her art history training had taught her how to look at a thing carefully and ask why it was the way it was. And food, it turned out, was the same kind of thing as a painting. And Lucas was the kind of artist who had been waiting his entire career for someone to ask why his choices were his choices. On the third Wednesday, he started leaving small tasting plates on the far side of the island for her. Without asking, without making a production of it, a tiny bite of something he had been working on that afternoon. A single perfect slice of an heirloom tomato with olive oil and flaky salt. A spoonful of a soup he was testing. A square of a dessert that had not made the final cut. He would set the plate down on the far side of the island with a small clean fork next to it, and he would go back to his work. And Naomi would pick up the fork and taste, slowly, with her eyes closed, and she would tell him what she thought. The first time she told him what she thought, it was a tomato. She said, "It tastes like a tomato should taste. It tastes like a tomato I would have picked from my grandmother's garden in August when I was 8 years old." He had stopped cutting what he was cutting and looked at her. He said, "Mrs. Harrington, that is exactly what I was trying to do with that tomato." She said, "Naomi, please, when we are in the kitchen and my husband is asleep, please call me Naomi." He said, "Naomi, thank you for the compliment about the tomato. It is the best compliment anyone has given me about a tomato in 10 years. She laughed. It was a real laugh. It surprised both of them. After that night, the visits were not small anymore. They were still quiet. They were still careful. But they were not small. She started coming down earlier, staying longer, tasting more things. He started preparing things specifically for her. One night he made her a small bowl of a chocolate and olive oil sauce he had been developing and watched her face when she tasted it, and when she made a small involuntary sound at the first bite. He smiled in a way he had not smiled in 5 years, and she saw the smile and felt something inside her chest shift sideways by about half an inch. They talked about everything that was not dangerous. His childhood in upstate New York, her childhood in Atlanta, her mother the English teacher, his mother the pastry chef, his year in Lyon, her year writing her first master's thesis, the painters she loved, the chefs he loved, the way a piece of music and a piece of food could do the same thing to a person if you knew how to listen to both of them. The way time slows down in a kitchen at midnight when nobody else is awake. They did not talk about her husband. They did not talk about his last girlfriend. They did not talk about the fact that the longer he cooked for her, the harder it was becoming for him to leave the penthouse at 2 in the morning and drive home to his empty apartment in Astoria. They did not talk about the fact that the longer she came down to see him, the harder it was becoming for her to go back to her bedroom and close the door. On a Tuesday in the middle of the 3rd week, he opened a bottle of wine at the end of the night. A small private bottle he had brought from home. A Pinot Noir from a producer in Oregon he had discovered the year before. He poured 2 glasses. He set one on the far side of the island for her and said, "I am going home in 10 minutes. I am going to have 1 glass of this wine before I go because I am tired and it was a long night. You are welcome to have the other glass if you want it, no pressure. I just thought you might enjoy it." She walked around to the side of the island where he was standing. She picked up the glass. She did not go back to the far side. She stayed on his side. He noticed. He did not say anything about it. They drank the wine standing 6 inches apart from each other, their hips almost touching the marble edge of the island, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights spread out 42 floors below them. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The wine was good. The city was quiet in the particular way New York is only quiet at 1 in the morning on a weeknight in October. Somewhere across the skyline, a single red light was blinking on top of a crane. He said, "Naomi?" She said, "Yes." He said, "I should probably go home." She said, "I know." He said, "I do not want to go home." She said, "I know that too." He said, "I am not going to do anything that you do not ask me to do. I want you to know that. You are a married woman. I am the chef. There is a line, and the line is yours to draw, and I am not going to cross it. I am just telling you because I think you deserve to know that if the line ever moves, I will know where it moved to." She set the wine glass down on the marble. She turned her face toward him. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "Lucas, go home tonight. I am not ready yet, but I am going to be ready soon. I want you to know that too. He said, okay. He finished his wine. He put the glass in the sink. He took off his white chef coat and folded it neatly over the back of one of the kitchen stools. He picked up his coat and his bag. He walked to the service elevator. At the elevator door, he turned around one more time and looked at her standing alone on the other side of the kitchen island in her pale silk robe with the city lights behind her, and he said, "Naomi, good night." She said, "Good night, Lucas." The elevator doors closed. He was gone. She stood in the kitchen by herself for 20 minutes after he left. She did not move. She was thinking. She was planning. She was building a small, quiet sentence inside her chest that she was going to say out loud to him in this exact kitchen the very next time he came to cook. She did not know what day that would be. She did not know what time. She only knew that when the moment came, she was going to know it. For the next 6 days, she carried the sentence inside her chest like a stone in her pocket. She took it out and looked at it when she was alone. She put it back when anyone was watching. She rehearsed it in front of the mirror in her bathroom twice, mouthing the words without sound, watching her own face make the shapes of the words. The words felt foreign on her lips the first time. The words felt familiar on her lips the second time. By the third day, the words felt like the truest thing she had ever not yet said out loud. Cyrus was in and out of the penthouse all week, distracted, taking calls at all hours. He passed her in the hallway on Thursday morning and did not say good morning. He ate breakfast with his assistant on Friday and did not invite her to join them. On Saturday, he flew to San Francisco for 2 days of meetings and did not tell her until an hour before his car arrived for the airport. She waved at him from the doorway as he left. He waved back without looking at her. She spent the weekend alone, reading, walking in the private rooftop garden, thinking about Lucas, thinking about the sentence, thinking about the fact that her husband had not noticed her in 11 months. And that this particular absence of notice was no longer a wound she was carrying. It had become the exact condition that made the next thing possible. The next dinner party was scheduled for Wednesday evening. 7 guests, all investors. Lucas arrived at 3 in the afternoon to begin prep. Naomi did not come into the kitchen during prep. She stayed in her sitting room with a book she was not reading. At 7, the guests arrived. At 7:30, they were seated for the first course. At 9:30, the second course was served. At 11, the dessert went out. At 11:45, the guests began to leave. At 12:15, the last guest was in the private elevator heading down. At 12:20, Cyrus went into his study and closed the door without saying goodnight to his wife because he had a conference call with Singapore at 1 in the morning, and he had a habit of forgetting she existed when a conference call was coming. At 12:40, Naomi walked out of her sitting room in a long black silk robe tied loosely at the waist. Her hair was down. Her feet were bare. The sentence was no longer a stone in her chest. The sentence was a living thing sitting just behind her teeth. She walked down the long hallway to the kitchen. Lucas was there. He was cleaning. The dishwasher was running. Most of the pots were already washed and put away. The marble island had been wiped down. He had taken off his white chef coat. He was in a plain black t-shirt and black pants. His hair was slightly damp at the temples from the heat of the service. He did not hear her come in. The dishwasher was running and his back was to the doorway, and he was focused on a small paring knife he was using to trim the last of the herbs he had been saving for a garnish he had not ended up using. She stopped for a moment at the doorway and just looked at him. She watched the way his shoulders moved under the black shirt. She watched the precise, careful motion of his hands. She watched the blonde hair at the back of his neck. She felt the sentence come all the way up from behind her teeth and settle onto the tip of her tongue, and she knew that this was the moment, and she knew that if she did not say it now, she was never going to say it at any time in any place ever. She crossed the kitchen in bare feet without making a sound. She came up behind him. He still did not hear her. She stopped 6 inches behind him. She could smell the faint, warm mixture of the kitchen on him, olive oil and shallots and something like clean cotton underneath it all. She breathed in once, slowly, the way a person breathes in before saying something she has been waiting her whole life to say. She leaned forward. Her mouth was half an inch from his ear. And she said, in a voice that was barely a whisper but was the clearest sound she had ever made in her entire life, "Put me on this counter and don't stop until I scream." The paring knife dropped out of his hand and landed on the marble with a soft, bright, metallic sound. He turned around slowly. His eyes met hers from exactly 6 inches away. She did not step back. He did not step forward. The kitchen was absolutely silent except for the faint hum of the dishwasher winding down. He looked at her for a long moment, the way a man looks at a woman who has just handed him a sentence he has been waiting his entire adult life for somebody to hand him. He said, "Naomi?" Her name in his mouth was a question and an answer at the same time. She said yes. That was all she needed to say. His hand came up and rested against the side of her face. And the look he gave her was not the look of a chef looking at a client and not the look of a stranger looking at a stranger, but the look of a man who had just decided that his entire life up until this moment had been the wrong shape, and the right shape was standing directly in front of him at 1:47 in the morning in a black silk robe with city lights behind her and the whole rest of the world 42 floors below them, very far away, and no longer relevant to anything at all. Dawn came to Manhattan at 6:14 on Thursday morning. Naomi was standing alone at the window of her private sitting room at the far end of the penthouse, wrapped in a clean white robe, holding a cup of coffee she had made for herself in the small espresso machine in the sitting room because she did not want to go back to the kitchen yet. The sky over the East River was the color of a ripe peach. The city 42 floors below her was beginning to move. A delivery truck turned the corner at Park and 76th. A jogger ran along the edge of the park. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a siren started and stopped. She was 32 years old. She had not slept. She was not tired. She was not the same woman she had been 12 hours ago. She did not yet know exactly how she was different. She only knew that something inside her chest, something that had been very small and very quiet for 11 months, had become very large and very loud, and she was going to have to figure out what to do with the largeness and the loudness, and she was going to have to figure it out quickly because her husband was going to come out of his study at 7:30 and walk past her sitting room on his way to the breakfast table, and she was going to have to look at him like nothing had happened. Her phone was on the small table beside the window. It buzzed quietly. She picked it up. It was a text message from a number she had only saved into her phone the previous week, under the name Herb Supplier. The message said, "I am on the Queensboro Bridge heading home. I wanted to tell you that the last few hours have been the only few hours of my entire adult life that have made any sense to me. I do not have any words for what just happened that are big enough for what just happened. I am going to go to sleep and I am going to wake up and I am going to go back to work. And then I am going to see you on Monday at 3 in the afternoon when I come to prep for the next dinner. And I am going to pretend in front of your husband that nothing has happened. And I am going to be counting the minutes until he goes to his study and you walk back into the kitchen. I love you. I have loved you for 3 weeks. I have been afraid to say it. I am not afraid anymore." She read the message 3 times. She set the phone down on the table beside the coffee cup. She put both of her hands flat against the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. She pressed her forehead against the glass between her hands. She closed her eyes. She was smiling. She was crying a little. She was laughing at herself for crying. She typed a reply with her thumbs without looking at the phone. Her reply said, I love you too. I loved you the first night you handed me a tomato. Come back on Monday. I will be waiting. She hit send. She picked up her coffee. She drank it slowly, watching the sun come all the way up over the East River and turn the city of New York into a thing made of copper and gold. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt like the city belonged to her again. At least a little bit, at least on the inside, at least for the length of 1 cup of coffee on a Thursday morning in October. Cyrus came out of his bedroom at 7:23. He walked past the sitting room without looking in. He went to the dining table. He ate half a grapefruit and drank 1 cup of coffee and read the Financial Times on his tablet. At 7:54, he got up and went to the private elevator and disappeared down to the garage where his driver was waiting. He did not say good morning to his wife. He did not notice she was in the sitting room at all, or that she had been awake all night, or that her face looked different than it had looked yesterday. He noticed nothing, because he had stopped noticing her 3 years ago, and he was not going to start noticing her again on this particular Thursday morning. She spent the rest of Thursday making 3 decisions. Her first decision was that she was going to see Lucas every Monday, every Wednesday, every Friday, every time he came to cook. Her second decision was that she was going to start looking quietly for a way out of her marriage. Not yet, not publicly. But she was going to start reading the prenuptial agreement she had signed 4 years ago. Her third decision was that she was going to call her old advisor from Columbia the next morning and ask him if there was a place in the New York art world for a woman who had been away from the field for 4 years and wanted to come back. She did not know what the answer would be. She knew for the first time in 4 years that she was willing to hear the answer. On Monday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Lucas arrived at the penthouse for prep. Naomi was in the kitchen when he walked in, standing at the marble island with a cup of tea in her hand, fully dressed, completely composed, her hair pulled back in a simple low ponytail. The housekeeper was in the kitchen too, polishing the silver for that night's service. Naomi smiled at Lucas the way a client's wife smiles at a chef who has been hired to prepare a dinner party. She said, "Good afternoon, Lucas." He smiled back the same way. He said, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harrington." They did not look at each other for more than 2 seconds. They did not need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been said between them in a text message thread saved under the name Herb Supplier. Everything else was a performance for the housekeeper, and they were both, as it turned out, very good performers. At 12:41 in the morning, after the dinner party had ended and the guests had left and Cyrus had gone into his study, Naomi walked down the hallway to the kitchen in her black silk robe. Lucas was waiting for her at the marble island. He had taken off his chef coat. He was in the black t-shirt again. He had poured 2 small glasses of a dessert wine he had brought from home. She walked up to him. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. He handed her one of the glasses. She took it. She drank half of it in one slow sip without looking away from his face. She set the glass down on the marble. She took a single step closer. He set his own glass down. He reached for her. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She did not look at it at first. He did not look at it at first. It buzzed a second time. It buzzed a third time. On the 4th buzz, she finally picked it up. Her face went still. The color went out of her cheeks. She showed Lucas the screen without speaking. The message was from her husband's personal assistant. The message said, "Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Harrington's Singapore trip has been canceled. He is flying home tonight instead of next Thursday. He will land at Teterboro at 3:15 in the morning. His car will have him at the penthouse by 3:45. I am letting you know so you can be awake to greet him. Thank you." Lucas read the message over her shoulder. He said, "Naomi, how long do we have?" She looked at the clock on the wall of the kitchen. The clock said 12:47. She said, "We have 2 hours and 58 minutes. Naomi looked at the clock on the wall of the kitchen for a second time. The clock said 12:47. She looked at Lucas. Lucas looked back at her. For one long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor penthouse, a single red light was blinking on top of a crane somewhere across the skyline, and the city of New York was going about its quiet, patient Wednesday night the way it always did. She said, 2 hours and 58 minutes is not enough. He said no, but it is what we have. She said, I do not want to spend it the way you think I want to spend it. Not tonight. Not with him landing in 3 hours, not with the risk. Tonight I want something different from you. Cook for me. Cook for me the way you cook for him at his dinner parties, except without him. I want to sit at this island and taste something you chose for me. I want to remember tonight not as the night I almost got caught, but as the night you fed me in your own kitchen for the first time. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a small, private smile, the smile of a man who had been given a better gift than he had expected to receive. He said, Okay, Naomi, sit down. Let me cook for you. She sat down on one of the tall stools at the far side of the marble island. She pulled the black silk robe a little tighter around herself. She watched him move. He went to the walk-in pantry and came out with a handful of ingredients. A small piece of wild striped base, a single heirloom tomato, a handful of basil, a lemon, a small bottle of good olive oil, a square of dark chocolate, a ripe pear. He moved the way he always moved in a kitchen, with the quiet, unhurried precision of a man who had spent a decade learning not to waste a single motion. He cleaned the fish. He sliced the tomato into paper-thin rounds. He tore the basil with his hands. He warmed a pan. He cooked the fish in nothing but olive oil and salt, 3 minutes on one side, 2 on the other. He plated the fish on a small white plate with the tomato rounds and the basil and a thin stream of pan juices over the top. He carried the plate around the island and set it down in front of her. He pulled up the stool next to hers and sat down. His knee touched her knee through the silk of the robe. Neither of them moved the knee. She said, You are going to sit next to me while I eat. He said, I have been cooking for strangers for 10 years. I am not letting you eat the first thing I have ever cooked for just you across the width of an island. She picked up the fork. She cut a small piece of the fish. She put it in her mouth. She closed her eyes. The fish was almost nothing, almost air, just the taste of the ocean and the olive oil and the lemon and the basil. When she opened her eyes, Lucas was watching her face the way a painter watches the last stroke of paint dry on a canvas he has been working on for months. She said, Lucas, I have eaten food prepared by chefs whose names are on the covers of books. I have never eaten anything as good as this piece of fish. He said, Thank you. That fish is what I think about when I am alone in my apartment at 3 in the morning trying to remember why I do this job. I cooked it for you because I wanted you to know what I actually taste like when I am not cooking for a dinner party. She finished the fish slowly. He did not eat. He just watched her. When the plate was empty, he took it away and brought the pear and the chocolate and 2 small glasses of a fortified wine. They ate side by side on the stools, knees still touching, watching the city lights spread out 42 floors below them. The clock ticked past 1:30, past 1:45, past 2. At 2:15, she turned to him and said, I need to go now. I need to be in the bedroom in a clean robe pretending to be asleep when my husband walks in at 3:45. I need to not kiss you when I leave. If I kiss you, I am not going to leave. He said, Okay. She stood up. She walked to the end of the island. She stopped. She turned around one more time. He was still sitting on the stool watching her. She said, Lucas, tonight was the best meal of my entire life. He said, Naomi, You were the best meal of mine." She laughed. She walked out of the kitchen. She walked down the long hallway in her bare feet. She did not look back. Cyrus Harrington landed at Teterboro at 3:15 in the morning. His car pulled up to the building at 3:43. He rode the private elevator up to the 42nd floor. He walked into the penthouse carrying his overnight bag. The housekeeper had left a small lamp on in the foyer for him. He walked down the hallway to the master bedroom. Naomi was in the bed in a clean white nightgown, breathing slowly and evenly the way a person breathes when they are pretending to be asleep. Cyrus stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a moment. He looked at her, then he turned around and walked to the guest bedroom at the other end of the hall. Because he did not want to wake her, or because he did not want to be in the same bed as her, she was not sure which. And at this particular point in her life, it did not matter anymore which it was. She heard his bedroom door close. She counted to 500 in her head, and when she was sure he was down for the night, she got out of the bed, walked to the window, and looked out at the city of New York spread out 42 floors below her. And she smiled a smile that nobody in the world was awake to see. The next morning at 9 o'clock, after Cyrus had left for the office, Naomi picked up her phone and made the call she had been thinking about making for 4 years. She called her old advisor from Columbia, a man named Dr. Warren Ellis, who had supervised her first master's thesis and who had, 6 years ago, told her at her wedding reception that he hoped she would not disappear from the field because the field would be poorer for it. He picked up on the third ring. He said, "Naomi Carter." "My God, is that really you?" She said, "Dr. Ellis, I am calling because I am thinking about coming back to work." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Ellis said, "Naomi, I have been waiting for this phone call for 4 years. Meet me for lunch tomorrow, 1 o'clock. Do not be late. I have 3 things to tell you and none of them can be said over the phone." The lunch with Dr. Ellis the next day was the first lunch Naomi had eaten in 3 years with a person who asked her real questions and wanted real answers. He spent the first 20 minutes apologizing for not calling her sooner. He spent the next 20 minutes listening to her tell him the truth about her marriage. He spent the last 20 minutes telling her about a brand new gallery in Brooklyn called Harrow Street, which was being opened by a former student of his who had made a fortune in finance and was now using the fortune to support black contemporary artists from the American South, and which needed a curator, and which had been quietly looking for one for 6 months without finding the right person. He had already told the founder about her. The founder had already said yes. Naomi had a meeting scheduled for the following Tuesday. The meeting at Harrow Street lasted 2.5 hours. The founder was a 45-year-old woman named Simone Delacroix, sharp and funny and serious about the work, who had read every academic paper Naomi had ever published. They talked about artists. They talked about curation philosophy. By the end of the meeting, Simone had offered her the position, and Naomi had accepted, and the start date was set for 6 weeks later. Naomi did not tell Cyrus. Not yet. She went to see a divorce lawyer the following week, a woman named Rebecca Chen. She brought the prenuptial agreement with her. Rebecca read it carefully and said, "Mrs. Harrington, this prenup is tight. You are not getting any of the real money, but you get to keep your personal accounts, your jewelry, the car he gave you, and a settlement that is embarrassingly small by his standards, but by your standards is going to be more than enough to live on for several years if you are careful." "Is that enough for you?" Naomi said. "That is plenty. I am going back to work." Meanwhile, the kitchen nights continued. Every Monday and every Wednesday and every Friday night after Cyrus had gone into his study and the staff had gone home, Naomi walked down the long hallway in her black silk robe to the kitchen, and Lucas was there waiting for her. Some nights he had cooked her something small. Some nights he had a glass of wine ready. Some nights he had nothing but the kitchen lights low and his arms open. They talked about their days. They talked about the gallery. They talked about his dream of opening his own small restaurant someday. And sometimes the conversation would trail off, and he would look at her in a particular way, and she would set her wine glass down on the marble, and he would reach for her across the edge of the island, and his hand would come up to the side of her face, and the world outside the kitchen would narrow down to the two of them, and whatever happened between them on those nights belonged entirely to the two of them, and to the cold silver light of the city through the floor to ceiling windows and to nobody else in the world. Each of those nights ended the same way, with her walking back down the hallway to her bed alone, and with him riding the service elevator down to the garage, and with both of them knowing that the next Monday was coming, and that the next Monday was the thing keeping both of them alive right now. 3 weeks after her lunch with Dr. Ellis, the thing that Naomi had been quietly waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it finally happened. It happened on a Thursday morning in late October. Naomi was drinking coffee in the sitting room when her phone started buzzing with news alerts. She picked it up. The headline on the first alert said, "Securities and Exchange Commission opens investigation into Harrington Capital over alleged accounting irregularities." The investigation centered on a series of accounting decisions made by Harrington Capital's CFO, a man named Miles Torvald, who had been with Cyrus for 17 years. The article named Cyrus Harrington once in a sentence that said Mr. Harrington has not been personally accused of any wrongdoing, but the investigation is expected to extend to senior leadership. Naomi read the article 3 times. She closed the phone. She picked up her coffee cup and finished her coffee. Then she did something she had not done in 3 years. She laughed out loud in her own sitting room by herself for 90 seconds straight. Cyrus came out of his bedroom an hour later looking like a man who had not slept. He walked past the sitting room without seeing her. He went into his study and closed the door. He was in the study for the rest of the day. His assistant came at noon. His lawyer came at 2. A second lawyer came at 4. Nobody knocked on the sitting room door. Nobody seemed to remember she was in the penthouse at all. That night at 8:30, Cyrus finally came out of the study. He walked into the sitting room. He sat down on the chair across from her. He said, "Naomi, I need to tell you some things. The SEC investigation is going to be bad. It is going to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal by the end of next week. I am going to lose a lot of money. I am going to have to step down as CEO for at least 18 months while this plays out. I know our marriage has not been what either of us wanted it to be. I know I have been a bad husband for a long time. If you stand next to me for the next 6 months while I get through the worst of this, I will give you a very generous divorce at the end of it. I am asking you to help me survive this, Naomi." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She felt a small surprising thing inside her chest, which was that she did not hate him. She pitied him a little. She felt sorry for the tired old man sitting across from her, who had built an empire and was about to watch it wobble, and who had ignored his wife for 3 years because the empire had been more important to him, and who now needed the wife he had ignored to stand next to him on a stage. She did not hate him, but she also did not owe him. She said, "Cyrus, I am not going to stand next to you for 6 months. I am sorry. I am not going to be a prop in your damage control campaign, but I am also not going to be in the tabloids tomorrow morning saying anything bad about you. I am going to disappear from this penthouse as quietly as I can. You can tell anyone who asks that we separated 6 months ago by mutual agreement. I am not going to contradict that story. I am going to be gracious in public and silent in private. That is what I am offering." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating. Then his shoulders dropped about half an inch and his face did something she had not seen before, which was that it admitted defeat. He said, "Okay, Naomi, that is fair. Do you need anything from me right now?" She said, "No. My lawyer's already handling the paperwork. You will be served on Monday morning. The settlement in the prenup is fine. I am not asking for more. All I am asking for is a clean, quiet divorce and your word that you will not make it ugly. Can I have your word?" He said, "You can have my word." He stood up. He walked to the door of the sitting room. At the door he stopped and turned around one more time. He said, "Naomi, for what it is worth, I am sorry I was not a good husband. I should have noticed you. I am sorry I did not." She said, "Thank you, Cyrus, I believe you." Naomi Carter Harrington moved out of the 42nd floor penthouse on a Saturday morning in the second week of November. She took 3 suitcases. She did not take the jewelry except for the small pearl earrings her mother had given her at her college graduation. She did not take the dresses except for 4 that she actually liked. She did not take any of the art on the walls, because none of the art on the walls had ever belonged to her. The Rothkos stayed. The Moroccan rug in the library she had picked out in Marrakesh, she did take, because the rug was the one thing in the whole penthouse that had been hers, and she rolled it up herself and carried it down to the lobby in 2 trips. Cyrus was not home when she left. He was in a meeting downtown with his lawyers. The housekeeper watched her pack with tears in her eyes and did not say anything. Naomi hugged her at the door and said, "Mrs. Alvarez, thank you for taking care of me for 4 years." Mrs. Alvarez said, "Mrs. Harrington, I hope you find what you are looking for." Naomi said, "I already have." She moved into a small 2-bedroom walk-up apartment in Park Slope, Brooklyn, 6 blocks from the Harrow Street Gallery, where she was starting work on Monday. The apartment had wooden floors and a brick wall in the living room and 1 window that looked out onto a tree. Her first night there, she unrolled the Moroccan rug in the middle of the living room floor and sat on it cross-legged with a glass of wine and no furniture except a camping chair she had bought at a hardware store the day before. She looked around at the empty room. She thought about the $42 million penthouse she had walked out of that morning. She picked up her phone and called her mother in Atlanta. They talked for an hour. Naomi told her everything except the part about Lucas. Her mother cried during the phone call. Her mother also laughed during the phone call. When the call ended, Naomi sat on the rug in the empty living room and cried and laughed a little too. On her second night in Brooklyn, Lucas came over with dinner. He came over with 2 bags of groceries and a chef's knife and a small bottle of olive oil that had been his grandmother's. He walked into the empty kitchen and looked around and laughed. The kitchen was about the size of the walk-in pantry at the penthouse. The stove was a 4-burner electric from 1992. The counter was Formica. The sink was chipped enamel. He said, "Naomi, this kitchen is perfect." She said, "It is the worst kitchen in the 5 boroughs." He said, "I know. It is perfect. I have cooked in 12 kitchens that cost more than this entire building, and none of them have ever meant anything to me. This one is going to mean everything." He cooked her dinner on the broken stove. He made a simple pasta with olive oil and garlic and red pepper flakes, and a green salad and a piece of bread from a bakery down the street. They ate standing up in the kitchen because she did not have a table yet. They drank cheap red wine from 2 mismatched glasses she had bought at a thrift store that afternoon. After dinner, he helped her wash the 2 plates at the chipped enamel sink. He dried his hands on a dish towel. He turned to her. He said, "Naomi, I am going to kiss you now. I have been wanting to kiss you in a kitchen that belongs to you and not to him for 7 weeks. I am going to kiss you, and I am going to keep kissing you. And I am going to not stop until you tell me to stop." She said, "Lucas, do not stop." He did not stop. Sunday morning in her new apartment came slowly. The tree outside the bedroom window was losing the last of its yellow leaves. Lucas was still asleep on his side of the mattress, 1 arm flung across his chest, his blonde hair falling across his forehead the way it always did. Naomi watched him for a long time without moving. She was thinking about the fact that a woman could spend 4 years of her life being a certain kind of wife in a certain kind of penthouse, and wake up one Sunday morning in a 2-bedroom walk-up in Park Slope with a chef asleep next to her on a cheap mattress and feel, for the first time in her adult life, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. He opened his eyes. He saw her watching him. He smiled. He said, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning." He said, "What are you thinking about?" She said, "I am thinking about the fact that I am going to start my new job tomorrow morning. I am thinking about the fact that my life has been the wrong shape for 6 years, and today is the first day it is not. I am thinking about you." He said, "I am thinking that I am going to open my own restaurant." She said, "When?" He said, "As soon as I can find the right space and raise the money. I have been saving for 6 years. I have almost enough. I need a small place, 18 seats, a tasting menu that changes every week. I want to cook for people who know what they are eating, the way I have been cooking for you. I do not want to do private chef work forever. I want a kitchen of my own that I can stand in for the rest of my life." She said, "Lucas, I have an idea." She got out of bed. She walked to the living room. She came back with her laptop. They spent the next 3 hours on that mattress making a plan for a small restaurant in a neighborhood they had not yet picked with money they had not yet fully raised. They named the restaurant at noon. They named it Harrow because the gallery where Naomi was starting work the next morning was called Harrow Street, and because harrow is a word that means both a tool that prepares soil for planting and the act of breaking something open in order to let something new grow inside it. And they both thought that was a good name for a restaurant that a pastry chef's son from upstate New York was going to open with the savings he had built during 10 years of 90-hour weeks. 8 weeks later, Lucas signed a lease on a small space on a quiet street in the West Village. 6 weeks after that, the kitchen was built. 4 weeks after that, the 18 seats were installed. 3 weeks after that, Harrow opened its doors for its first service. The first table that ever ate at Harrow was a young couple from Connecticut on their wedding anniversary, who had booked 3 months in advance because Lucas's food magazine profile had run a second time the week before the opening. Naomi was there on opening night. She worked the front of house for the first week because they could not afford to hire a hostess yet. She stood at a small wooden podium by the door and greeted every single person who walked into the restaurant. When she was not at the podium, she was washing wine glasses in a small sink behind the bar. She was the worst wine glass washer in the West Village. She was also the happiest woman in New York. 6 months after Harrow opened, Naomi moved out of her Park Slope apartment and into the small 1-bedroom above the restaurant that Lucas had been quietly renovating in his spare hours. The bedroom had a window that looked out over the West Village rooftops. The kitchen upstairs was almost as small as the one in Park Slope, but it had a gas stove now, and a table, and 2 chairs Lucas had found at a flea market in Red Hook. The Moroccan rug she had carried out of the penthouse 4 years earlier went on the living room floor. 1 year to the day after the opening of the restaurant, Lucas closed Harrow to the public for 1 night. He did not tell Naomi why. He just told her to wear the dress she liked best and to meet him downstairs at 8 o'clock. She came down the stairs at 8 in a dark red silk dress and the small pearl earrings her mother had given her at her college graduation. The restaurant was empty except for 1 table at the back set for 2, with a single white candle and a small dark red rose in a glass and a bottle of wine she recognized as the Pinot Noir he had opened for her in the penthouse kitchen a 1.5 years earlier, on the night he had told her the line was hers to draw. He was standing by the table in a dark blue shirt and clean dark pants. The look on his face was the look of a man who had been planning something for a long time and was about to find out whether he had planned it right. She walked across the empty restaurant to him. He pulled the chair out for her. She sat down. He sat across from her. He poured the wine. He said, "Naomi, I am going to feed you dinner tonight, and in between courses I am going to say some things, and I want you to listen without saying anything until I finish. Is that okay?" She said yes. He brought the first course out from the kitchen himself. It was a small piece of wild striped bass with an heirloom tomato and torn basil and a thin stream of pan juices over the top. She looked at the plate for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. She said, "Lucas, this is the fish." He said, "Yes. This is the fish. I cooked it for you in the penthouse kitchen 1 year and 3 months ago on the night I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life feeding you. I wanted to cook it for you again tonight because I want you to remember what that night felt like." She did not say anything. She picked up her fork. She cut a small piece of the fish. She put it in her mouth. She closed her eyes. The fish tasted exactly like the fish in the penthouse had tasted. Somehow, in a completely different kitchen, in a completely different city, in a completely different life, it was the same fish. He said, "Naomi, I have never loved anyone the way I love you. I did not know I was capable of loving anyone the way I love you. I thought for 10 years that my job was the biggest love of my life. And then I walked into a penthouse kitchen on Park Avenue on a Tuesday in late September, and I met a woman who tasted a tomato and told me it tasted like her grandmother's garden in August. And I found out that my job had just been practice for meeting her. I love you more than I love cooking." I did not know that sentence was going to be true until I said it out loud just now, but it is true. She was crying a little. She was not wiping the tears away. He reached across the table and put his hand on her hand. He said, "Naomi, I remember what you said to me in that kitchen at 1:47 in the morning on the night everything changed. I remember every word of it. I have thought about it every day for 15 months. I am not going to repeat it out loud tonight because there is a bus boy asleep in the break room and I do not want to wake him. But I want you to know that I remember. And I want you to know that the answer I gave you that night is the same answer I am still giving you every single day." She laughed through the tears. She said, "Lucas," he said, "wait. I have one more thing." He reached into the pocket of his dark blue shirt. He took out a small dark blue box. He set the box on the table between them. He opened the box. Inside the box was a simple gold ring with a single small stone in it. The stone was not a diamond. The stone was a small, smooth piece of dark red jasper that he had found on a beach in Maine the summer before and had carried in his pocket for 8 months, waiting for it to tell him what to do with it, until one morning it had finally told him. He said, "Naomi Carter, will you marry me?" She said yes. She said it without hesitating. She said it the way she had said yes to him in the kitchen on the night of the paring knife, which was to say without a single shred of doubt, without any need to think about it, without any part of her pulling in any other direction. She said yes. And then she got up and walked around the table and sat down in his lap and put her arms around his neck, and he put his arms around her waist. And they sat there for a long time at the small table at the back of the empty restaurant at the end of a quiet street in the West Village, and neither of them spoke, and the candle burned low, and the wine glasses caught the light, and outside the window a single yellow cab went slowly past on the wet street. They got married 6 months later at a small ceremony at Harrow, with 20 friends, on a Sunday afternoon in May. Naomi's mother and father came up from Atlanta. Lucas's father and sister came down from upstate New York. Simone Delacroix from the gallery gave the toast. The food was cooked by Lucas and 3 of his line cooks who had insisted on cooking for the wedding instead of being guests. On the morning of their first wedding anniversary, Naomi made Lucas breakfast in the small kitchen upstairs. She was not a good cook. She had never claimed to be a good cook. She had, however, learned to make one thing well, which was scrambled eggs with butter and chives from the small herb garden on the fire escape. She made him the eggs. She carried the plate to him at the table by the window. He ate every bite. He said it was the best plate of eggs he had ever had in his life. She knew he was lying, and she knew he was telling the truth at the same time. After breakfast, they went back to bed for an hour because it was Sunday and the restaurant was closed and there was nowhere either of them had to be. She was lying with her head on his shoulder and his arm around her when she said, "Lucas, do you remember what I said to you in the penthouse kitchen on the night everything started?" He said, "I remember." She said, "I have never told anyone what I said that night, not my mother, not Simone, not anyone. It is a sentence that belongs only to the two of us and to the 42nd floor of a penthouse on the Upper East Side on a cold night in October." He said, "Good. I am glad. Some sentences should only belong to two people." She said, "I have a new sentence I want to tell you." He said, "What is it?" She said, "Put me on any counter anywhere in this city for the rest of my life, and I will not need anything else." He smiled. It was a slow, quiet, very private smile, the smile of a man who had spent 2 years learning a new way to be happy and had gotten good at it. He said, "Naomi, that is a deal. And that is the true story of the billionaire's black bride and the blonde private chef she ambushed after midnight in a kitchen on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan penthouse. It is not a scandal story. It is not a crime story. It is a love story. It is the story of a woman who was dying inside a beautiful building and a man who was starving inside a beautiful career, and how the two of them found each other over a tomato and a plate of fish and a whispered sentence in a kitchen at 1:47 in the morning, and how they left their old lives behind, one suitcase and one chef's knife at a time, and built a new life together above a small restaurant on a quiet street in the West Village, with a gas stove that worked and a Moroccan rug on the floor and a gold ring with a small piece of red jasper in it, and how they lived every day after that, the way two people are supposed to live when they have finally found the one they were always supposed to find. Her name was Naomi, his name was Lucas, and they lived happily, hungrily, and very much alive for the rest of their lives together.